Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
It's a day of controversies, lexicographical and otherwise. We'll speak with, because lexicographical.
Yeah, it's a hard word to say.
It is.
That's why I wrote it into your part of the script.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Good thing we're talking to the word nerd later. We'll speak with Vito Perrone about the ongoing Easthampton School Committee debacle surrounding the word ladies.
Later in the show, we'll talk with Western New England University law professor Jen Taub, a friend of E. Jean Caroll, who former President Trump was found liable for sexually abusing and defaming. And we'll get Professor Taub's take on the federal charges now facing Congressman George Santos.
But first,
we've just been having a vivacious conversation off the air about the whole Easthampton ladies word controversy, but that is not the word controversy that we're talking about with the word nerd, Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster today. There's another local word-based
It seems
issue.
like there's always controversies with words going on, which is pretty awesome.
Two local ones to focus on, and we'll talk with Vito Perrone later about the other controversy with the Easthampton School Department. But this is the headline from the Daily Hampshire Gazette. School at Smith College ends use of word field. Says it has negative connotations with racism, slavery. An article by Alexander McDougall. The Smith College School of Social Work will no longer use field in reference to any aspect of its program. A word the school says may have negative connotations with racism and slavery. In an email last week, School of Social Work faculty member Katya Serrar, Ariana Napier-White, and Mary Beth Stratton said the change reflected the school's stated core principles that call for centering the lived experiences of marginalized communities, among other things. We invited Smith College to come on with the word nerd and talk about the word field. And they did say, the spokesperson, that they were a big fan of Emily Brewster, but that they did not want to come on the radio and discuss it. They did give us a statement that said, consistent with the guiding principles of the social work profession, Smith College's School for Social Work strives for intentional accountability. Recognizing the power of word choice, the school has changed the name of the Office of Field Education to the Office of Practicum Learning. The school specifically chose the word practicum, a course of study that involves the supervised practical application of previously studied theory, to better reflect the experience of faculty and students. Rather than a reactive moment, this is a proactive decision to bring the language of the school's program more in line with its goals and intentions. So this wasn't based on a complaint. This was based on a proactive decision. They're not the first social work school to have done this. A school in California did it earlier. So we thought we'd ask the dictionary about the history and etymology of the word field. Emily Brewster?
Oh, you wanted to know about the history and the etymology of the word field? Well, it's an Old English word, right? The word field is 1,000 years old. And it first referred to an open area of land, nothing to do with cultivation or a lack of cultivation or anything. It was, like a flat area of land, like a field of wildflowers. So that's its earliest use. But the word is, as we say in the dictionary business, polysemous. It has many, many different meanings. Polysemous, Polyssemous. And so, it's got lots and lots of application. And the word is applied in lots of different scenarios. And sure, some people do have an association of the word field with people who were forced to do labor in fields. It's very interesting to me that this is a choice that is being made in social work now at two different colleges. The other was University of Southern California. Both cases, social work. I think it's interesting.
This article about the same issue from Mass Live by Will Ketcher does say that while field can mean an expansive area of land or crops, in academia or the sciences, it often describes work done in a real-world environment. A biologist, for instance, may collect field observations on an animal by observing it in its natural habitat. Some of the take that I've heard from other people is that maybe field is not an adequate description of what it means when people in the sociology department leave their quote-unquote ivory tower and go amongst the hoi polloi, the common people. But do any of the definitions that Merriam-Webster includes on this particular word have slave connotations in its subsequent definitions?
Not specifically, but there are certainly established phrases that evoke slavery, but also any kind of imbalance between like a field hand and the person who is in charge of the field hands. There are lots of these phrases that appear. I want to clarify, this is not sociology, this is social work. Sociology and social work are very distinct. One is, as I understand it, not being a sociologist or a social worker, but sociology seems to me at much greater remove from the subject. There's a subject of study, which is the society. And a social worker is actually far more relational, as I understand it. And I think about the implication of field almost being like it emphasizes the observational aspect of the work as opposed to the relational aspect of the work. And in that sense, there's a shift away from field maybe makes sense intuitively to me as just a speaker of the language, not even as a professional lexicographer.
That being said, Smith did make the decision to change this word in the social work department and make the direct relationship to it potentially having harmful reaction and connecting it with slavery. But again, the dictionary doesn't go that far. I'm of two minds personally about this particular thing, because I am one who will say language is always evolving, and I think that we need to be as empathetic as we possibly can in our language. That being said, I question whether or not Smith should be focusing on more useful ways of being less harmful.
Has Smith said that the science departments are also not using the word field? Is it across the board at the college?
No, I don't think so.
It's only the School of Social Work. And I'm pretty sure from what I've read from them that, they're not going to change the name of like field hockey or things like that actually happen outside in the green plot of land that's outside of Smith College.
I feel like that would be taking it a step too far. Like, clearly that refers to an actual field as opposed to a proverbial field.
So you like the literal field, but not the proverbial.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was curious about if it's not a campus-wide adoption for the non-use of the word field, how does that reflect on the departments that are continuing to use it?
My understanding is that this is actually an office that the name is being changed of, so not even a department. So it's really a pretty localized change that's being made. With all these choices that we make and how we name things, to my mind, the most important thing is how that change feels to the people who are affected by it. So it doesn't really matter how I feel about it or, how people outside really feel about it. Does this feel like a positive change to the people who are affected by the work that the social work department does? If it does, then probably worth doing.
Right.
The Gazette article does say that the School of Social Work faculty members cited the plan as a part of its reasoning behind the change of wordage. We recognize that adopting a new name for our office can be challenging, and we expect that this will take some time, but we hope that you'll join us in this effort to be intentional and inclusive and to stay open and actively engaging with change. What's interesting to me about this is that it wasn't based on a complaint. So a couple of years ago, a well-established event in Northampton that's a fundraiser for the schools where bands would perform as other bands changed its name. The original name of the event was called Trans Performance because you were going to transform and perform at the same time. That was perfect in the 90s and early 2000s, but it's clear that trans has taken on a new meaning in the common parlance. And if you're especially somebody new to the area and you hear there's an event called Trans Performance, it may be a very different event that you're expecting to be going to. So out of an abundance of caution and, I think, kindness, they decided to just change the name. They started calling the event Performance. It was easy to make fun of that at the time to say, are we going to take the Pioneer Valley Portation Authority to the event that they took the trans out of and just refer to as Performance?
I feel like the bigger issue here is that it definitely needs a better name.
Yeah, that's true.
Because Performance is so nothing when that event is so cool, which isn't to say that they should have continued using Trans Performance. I totally understand the reasoning for changing the name. I did then, I do now. But just calling it Performance is y'all, you could do better.
The summer where they changed it, it was all the literature was out under the name Trans Performance. And then there was a bit of what felt like a knee-jerk reaction to change it from Trans Performance to Performance. Now, I didn't hear of any specific complaints about the event. Again, it was almost in anticipation, not unlike this Smith discussion of the word field. So my question, and I guess this is just your opinions, should we wait until there's a complaint, or is getting out in front of an issue like this good? Or is it performative to say we're going to change Trans Performance to Performance? We're going to stop using field work and start calling it practicum.
I feel like it's good to get out in front of it in general. I feel like it often feels more performative when you wait until there's a complaint, because it assumes that you were fine with the way that it was instead of looking for ways to be better with your language and more thoughtful in the words that you're using. But that's just me.
I agree. I mean, if language, we've got two main goals that language has, right? It's communication and it's expression. And if you recognize at some point that your communication is likely to be hindered by a word choice, because people are going to get hung up on it, they're going to possibly find it offensive. As soon as you recognize that this might cause people to not get to the other side of what you're trying to say, then it's worth changing. Like it's like if the communication is likely to be hindered, then yeah, you want to find a more effective way to communicate. It's not effective if you're offending people. Yes, your ability to communicate something can be hindered by being overly concerned about what might possibly offend. But if there is reason, when you have reason to believe that something might offend or that it might communicate something inaccurately, then yeah, that's when you change it.
The Mass Live article says when University of Southern California came to the same decision, that officials said, quote, field work in similar terms may have connotations for descendants of slavery and immigrant workers that are not benign. Then they quote a Smith College student, Aina Endo, saying, I never really saw it that way before when informed of the new language policy. And quote, hearing about it now, I think the word has many different contexts and it's the way you use it that matters. I think overall, this word field and the decision really feels like a positive step, but a very small positive step in an otherwise fraught situation historically with the legacies of these colleges, their institutions, where their foundations have invested their money, how that money came to be endowed to these institutions in the first place.
Yeah.
But
it's like, I mean, are they centering that, like, the experience of the students of these communities in, like, their tuition? Because, I mean, it's real pricey to go to Smith.
Smith is getting better in that regard, and I'll give them that. They really have
That's
tried
true.
to make it
That's
so
true.
that they're not getting people into crippling debt to go to their institutions and reaching out to try to get a more broad spectrum of people who might not have historically been able to access that institution. So it's the plate tectonics of society where like slow, tiny earthquakes and sometimes big earthquakes of change. I wonder, Emily Brewster, since the Smith College, at least this office in the sociology department, will begin using practicum, maybe we should learn a little bit more of what the dictionary has to say about the word practicum.
Yeah, practicum it's an interesting choice, right? Field is this 1,000-year-old word that is from Old English. It is a very deeply English word. Practicum, meanwhile, is Latin. It was borrowed from German in the late 19th century. As is the case with Latin-derived academic terms, it's really a term that kind of creates distance, which is another interesting fact about the language choice. Yeah, an irony for sure. We use academic, scientific, Latin-based language, often in these contexts because it feels universal. It also feels really smart, right? It feels more official somehow. And it is necessarily then kind of less of the people, of the hoi polloi, of the common human. I think it's a very interesting choice. But we are talking about an academic setting. So academia is perfectly fine with that in theory. But it is an interesting choice. And again, I wonder about how the people who are affected by it feel. I'm curious about who encounters these terms, who encounters the name of this office. Is it just the students? Is it the communities that they work with? And is it important that the students know that there is no connection to slavery or to ways that people have been abused and taken advantage of in agrarian situations, in farms, and that those students think instead of this as being an academic pursuit exclusively? I don't know. This is not intuitive to me. This choice is not an intuitive change. I do think that people are thinking more about the history of slavery in the United States and where it is in our language. There's talk about people no longer using the term master bedroom and master bathroom in real estate. I'm embarrassed that my profession is lexicography, and I had not made that association in my mind. And then I heard it and I was like, oh, that's gross. It's such an established phrase that a lot of people don't think about it until it's brought to their attention. And it may be that eventually that field ends up being cast in that same kind of light, but maybe not, because it is such a polysemous word and it has so many other established uses, and it has a very, very, very long history. It's not like master and slave, which have been taken out of tech vocabularies in a lot of ways, right? That was done explicitly a few years ago. And I do think that is an interesting corollary to what is happening here with this School of Social Work.
And frankly, reflective of like there being more Black coders out there doing more important work and bringing the issue up, because otherwise it never would have changed. Still accidentally in parlance when I'm building systems. Yeah, I feel like when you were putting motherboards together or like putting a computer together was only within the past like 5 or 6 years that you stopped seeing it on motherboards.
We can't call them motherboards anymore, or the gays are going to think it's Dolly Parton.
I always believe that a person should be who they are, and you should be comfortable being who you are, and people should leave you alone to be who you are and how you are. So I think I've always been accepted in the gay community because I accept them.
Everybody gay is Dolly Parton.
Girl.
Everybody gay is Dolly Parton.
It makes me want to put another motherboard into my computer.
What are you going to say to all of those gay computer engineers out there?
This board is so mother.
All right, I think I'm the only mother among the three of us, so
Yes.
How do you feel about motherboards?
motherboards are God bless them. God bless them, everyone.
It's Mother's Day coming up.
Yeah, motherboard day. Take all your computers out for brunch.
Would be an interesting thing because like the evolution of mother in gay culture as how your son is using it as opposed to like how I know to use it from like ages ago in gay culture, that's a fascinating evolution too.
Yeah.
Like how now?
Yeah, it seems like I've only heard of it pretty recently, but every day my son tells me who's mother today. It's always Dolly Parton, though. Well, thank you, Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster. Do you want to weigh in on the ladies' controversy with before Vito Perrone comes in?
No, I don't think you.
Okay.
My coat of many colors.
Coming up, we will speak with Dr. Vito Perrone, who has been at the center of attention locally and nationally in the search for a new superintendent in Easthampton.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. Dr. Vito Perrone is the Assistant Superintendent / Interim Superintendent of the West Springfield Public Schools.
From a Daily Hampshire Gazette article dated April 1st, Dateline Easthampton, Superintendent finalist Vito Perrone said Friday that the Easthampton School Committee rescinded its offer to hire him in executive session Thursday night, alleging that the reason was a perceived microaggression contained in an email he sent to the committee chairperson. What he claims came under fire is his addressing of the two committee members as ladies at the beginning of the email.
According to Perrone, Chairperson Cynthia Kwasinski said that using ladies was a microaggression, and the fact that he didn't know that as an educator was a problem. Perrone responded, "I was shocked. I grew up in a time when ladies and gentlemen was a sign of respect. I didn't intend to insult anyone." We had on the mayor of Easthampton talking about this issue last week, and when I ran into Dr. Vito Perrone at a Harold Grinspoon Foundation charity event last week, it seemed only fair that we invite him to respond.
Indeed.
And he's here in the studio with us.
He is indeed in studio with us. So to start, could you define microaggression?
Sure. A microaggression is any term that makes someone feel that they are less than another. It gets to that place where people who are of a segment in society who are underrepresented, who have been subjected to racism and bigotry, feel that they are less than others.
We had the mayor on, and I don't know if you had an opportunity to hear what she had to say last week, so I've taken a couple of clips from that conversation, and I thought you might want to respond to them. So the first part of the conversation from the mayor that I'll play for you now addresses microaggressions, and this particular one, ladies.
Ladies, and being called a lady, if termed a microaggression, which I know is a strong word, it should be taken as that fact and how they feel and how they'd like to be referred to. And I think it's fair to say that Chair Kwasinski and as well as Ms. Colby had the chair called out that's not the way she would like to be referred to. And that's for her to decide. That's no different than, a level of harassment in the workplace. Do I think on the scale of microaggressions, is it a massive one? No, there are many more that folks that, don't look at all at me, that aren't white, and it's not on that level. But it's also, though, important. She clarified in a public statement that she took it as an insult and a microaggression, and I feel that is for her to define and to be respected.
So what's your response to that? And do you consider, do you acknowledge that it was a microaggression in her opinion?
I in my experience, when we talk about offense and offending other people, usually there's some intent involved there. My intent was not to offend anyone. My intent was to address an email to Ms. Colby and the mayor. I had worked with Ms. Colby previously when I was the principal at Easthampton High School. I had a relationship with her. I've known her a long time. Initially, my email went just to her, and it said Sue email, and then I ended it with Vito. So when she responded and said, hey, would you mind sending it to the chair and me so that the chair receives it, I said, absolutely, I will. So I copied it, pasted it, and I put ladies as the heading. And it was not my intent to offend. And I initially said that in our meeting that if I offended anyone, I apologize. That was not my intent. And I kind of went into the my upbringing and the use of ladies and gentlemen, et cetera. And I was told that that the apology didn't really matter because the offer was rescinded.
So who did you make this apology to, and in what setting? Was it in that executive session that we have not yet seen the details of? That's when. So you're saying you did apologize?
Oh, absolutely. And in that session, so executive session is really clear. There's an agenda. There's an item on the agenda, and they're going to address that item with whomever is intended to attend. And so I hopped on the executive session. I was asked to step off for a few minutes while they discussed. My assumption was they were going to discuss the request that I was making, and which was shared in the email. And when I sat in the conference room and I waited because it was a Zoom or a Meet, and for 45 minutes I waited, and then I got a text, Dr. Perrone, please hop on. So I hopped on, and the first thing that was said to me was that the offer was being rescinded because I said ladies in the address, and that's a microaggression. And I really was. I've said this multiple times. I was shocked. And then I attempted to apologize, and the conversation, if you will, focused only when I was there. In the executive session, the conversation only focused on my use of ladies, the fact that it was a microaggression, the offer was rescinded. And that was it. There was no discussion. There was no negotiation. There was no even reference to my requests other than ladies and microaggression.
So I feel like there's the issue of intent with microaggressions, because often the intent isn't there, but that doesn't necessarily erase the fact that the microaggression is happening.
Understood.
This is the problem with a lot of workplaces, and especially like African American communities. Like there's just things that you do that are abrasive that you may not know about until someone brings it up.
Yes. Sorry.
So it has to be kind of an acknowledgement of it being a microaggression without needing the intent.
And are you saying you did acknowledge that and apologize?
I did. I said, if I offended you, I apologize. I'm sorry, and this is why. And as an educator, that's what we're supposed to do. Is we're supposed to have civil conversation. We're supposed to have discourse. We're supposed to allow people some opportunity to learn and grow. I wasn't afforded that. I wasn't even afforded my due process, and that I found difficult to take.
Now, and we're speaking with interim superintendent of the West Springfield Public Schools, former candidate for superintendent of Easthampton Schools, Dr. Vito Perrone. When we had the mayor on, she told us that what happened in that executive session could have and maybe should have stayed in executive session. And when that story first broke, what everyone was hearing about is ladies, the word ladies, and not on potentially other concerns that may have been brought up about you. And the idea that maybe you created a narrative out of this. Let's hear what the mayor had to say about that executive session.
Executive session is confidential, very purposely so, as are negotiations. I said as much to Dr. Perrone in that first executive session, that he was concerned. And I said, no one on this committee legally can speak about this. The statement will be that we entered negotiations and could not come to agreement. And I faithfully said, what you say is up to you, but this is what we're going to say. And if you should hear differently, then I would like to know, and Chair Kwasinski would like to know, because there are consequences to that. Dr. Perrone did then go public with his concerns and decided that it was that comment. It was much more, as well as the context and how he addressed the whole school committee in that executive session. But then to go public with his own narrative is utterly confounding to me. Utterly confounding.
So why did you decide to go public with that? And do you regret that decision now?
So if I could,
Sure.
One of the things that was mentioned was that it was executive session. Absolutely correct. In an executive session, if the individual is going to be discussed, that individual should be present in the executive session. So when I was asked to leave and for 45 minutes something was talked about, I wasn't present there to defend myself, nor was my representative, and that's part of the law, there to defend me. So when I did hop on the executive session, the only thing that was said to me was ladies and microaggression. So I responded to that. The reason I came forward, and the mayor's absolutely correct, she said to me, Dr. Perrone, we won't say anything about this. Alls we will say is we failed to come to a successful negotiation and contract. But that's not true. We never negotiated. We never talked about the requests I had. The only thing that was mentioned to me was that I used a microaggression, ladies.
The minutes for that session are technically requestable now, like only just now. Have you put in a request for the notes of the session?
I have not, because ultimately I was on it, asked to step off. I don't know what happened in the midst of that. It was never told to me. The only thing that was discussed with me was the fact that I used ladies. That was a microaggression.
Right. But as far as I can tell from what Massachusetts says for open session and executive sessions, there are four. Like, they have to keep some minutes of what happened in those 45 minutes as public record. And only now in the past, few days should that have become requestable. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, and that's true. But from my perspective, I wasn't privy to that. I wasn't allowed to be in there, even though I was supposed to be in there because they were talking about me, ostensibly. So I haven't requested it. And you're right. As far as I know, they're not yet available.
There must have been other concerns, is what came out after about a week of the story of ladies, then going national, and people, Fox News and everybody, and people writing letters from the West Coast to the local papers here about the quote-unquote woke mob. You still made this decision to run out there with this story. Do you regret doing that now? It seems to have caused a great deal of harm to the city of Easthampton and to the parents of the city of Easthampton, and going forward to try to find a superintendent in the future. Looking back on it, would you do this the same way?
Thank you very much, and reminding me, because that was one of the questions you asked. And I was there for a long time, for 6 years. I developed a relationship with the students and the parents. I was a coach. I was a principal. We built a new school. We went from level 3 to level 1. So I have ties to that community. I love Easthampton. I want to be their superintendent. The reason I went public, and I didn't call the media called me. I was called by the reporter, and she asked me if I would talk about what happened. The reason I went public is because what was told to me that night was that they wouldn't say the truth. The truth that was said to me. That the reason I didn't get it was because of the microaggression. What they said was that they would say we didn't come to negotiate a contract. That wasn't true, because I never had an opportunity to negotiate. I did not want the people of Easthampton and the parents and the teachers to think this was about money. It wasn't. Because
there are a lot of stories about 14 weeks vacation and things like that. Is that all of those details that you've seen so far true of things that you were asking for?
I didn't want people to think it was about money.
Okay.
When I got the call, right, I was sleeping. I was woken up at 12:15 by a police officer knocking on my door. And I then was told by the police officer, they're trying to get a hold of you, give them a call. So I did. They offered me the position at a rate of $151,000. And I said, is there room to negotiate that? Because the range was 142 to 157, I think. And they said, no, based on your experience, et cetera, we're going to place you here. Do you accept the position? And so I said to them, and almost a quote, I'm not going to make this about money. I accept the position. So it was never about money. And when you speak to the requests I made, they offered me, I received a contract, email. I looked at it, and Ms. Colby said, would you respond to the contract? And I said, absolutely. I looked at it, I marked it up a little bit, and I sent that email. And in that email, I asked, instead of 26 days, 30 days of vacation every year, right? Instead of what the language said was $151,000 for year 1 and no less than $151,000 for year 2 and 3. So I asked for a COLA, cost of living increase, year 2 and 3, right? 3%. And then I also asked for a sick bank. Now, the sick bank is basically, right now I work in West Springfield. I've worked there for 8 years. I have over 80 days of absences. So I wanted to have a nest egg, a sick bank that I could rely on in case something catastrophic happened. Because, yeah, I could take FMLA or whatever I needed, but you would charge for those days unless you have a bank. I worked in Easthampton for 6 years, and I accrued over 70 days of a sick bank. So I was just asking for a sick bank similar to what I have in West Springfield and what I had in Easthampton. Subsequently, I've talked to a superintendent who hired me, and she told me when she came from the Berkshires to Easthampton, she asked for a sick bank and got it. Now, different administration, different school committee, et cetera. Different situation, but similar circumstance. I felt like I was not being unreasonable. I already took a $15,000 cut in rate. I was not going to quibble over the other things. It was just a request. But I never got to negotiate, Monty.
Let me interrupt you before we run out of time here. But would you have done this differently? Would you have made this about ladies? That it became a national story, and I don't know if that was your intent because you wanted that kind of attention for this, or if that's just the way the media is working.
I do appreciate you bringing me back to the question because you did ask that. Thank you, Monty.
You're welcome.
So, no, I did not say that so that the microaggression thing became the huge news. No, I said it because I wanted people to understand what was said to me in the executive session and why the offer was rescinded, ostensibly.
Not to make this light, but I feel like this is where if we had taped this in advance, you would have inserted a Star Wars quote going, stay on target, stay on target.
Exactly. Or maybe this is a trap. All that being said, I mean, what have you learned through this?
Yes.
Are you going to change the way that you speak with women?
And non-binary folks, because...
People of color. Is this a learning experience for you?
It is a learning experience, and that's what we squandered here. There was an opportunity in that first week for us to come together and really talk about this, setting norms, setting expectations around what we are going to call each other, how we are going to use our language in meetings, in emails, etc. We do it all the time in our roles, but yet it didn't happen in this instance. I was never given an opportunity to learn and grow, if you will, from it. The offer was simply rescinded. I'm sorry that people were threatened. That was never my intent.
Because school committee members have been threatened.
They were threatened. I respect the work that they do. No one knows that more than me. I've worked in 3 different school districts, and I see the thankless, tireless hours those school committee members put in. I never wanted that to happen. I never wanted to get calls from the national media. This was just about what happened in Easthampton, and I wanted the people there to know that I was not being mercenary.
Dr. Vito Perrone, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. Coming up next, we'll speak with legal scholar and advocate Jennifer Taub about the implications surrounding Trump's civil rape trial and about the federal charges facing Congressman George Santos.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413, law professor at Western New England University and author of Big Dirty Money and Other People's Houses, host of the Politicon podcast, Booked Up, joins us. She's our regular correspondent when it comes to all things the legal troubles of the former president of the United States. Welcome back to the show, Jen Taub.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Monty and Khalees.
Of course. You're wonderful to talk to.
So the big news yesterday was the fact that, and this from the New York Times, a story by Lola Fadula, a federal jury in Manhattan found former President Donald J. Trump liable for sexually abusing and defaming the writer E. Jean Carroll. And we should note a warning that we may discuss issues having to do.
There's no may. It's the nature of the case.
Yes.
We will be discussing it.
Who had accused him of rape in the hours that followed. Trump then decided to criticize Ms. Caroll around the case. Apart from the fact that I think you're a legal genius, Jen Taub, you also have become friends.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I cut out again. Can you repeat that?
Apart from the fact that you're a legal genius, Jen Taub, you are also friends with E. Jean Carroll. And I'm assuming you have had the opportunity to go on this journey with her. Tell us about E. Jean Carroll as a human being and your relationship with her throughout all of this.
So a couple things to be clear. I have not spoken or emailed with E. Jean since the trial began. I think the only communication I had is I put a little note up on her Substack. Maybe I sent her a text yesterday with a crying emoji and a heart emoji. I met her via Twitter. You know those kinds of Twitter friendships you developed during COVID where someone's retweeting you a lot, and then the next thing I knew, we were like in a DM group together, and pretty soon we were Zooming and knitting. So we had this sort of like Zoom. We have a Zoom knitting circle.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now I want to start one of those.
Oh, it was sort of accidental. And then, we've met actually in person twice. We met once at a shared friend from that knitting group's book party. And then I also met her because I came to be supportive at a distance because it was during COVID when the one of the appeals was going through on that first defamation case. The question that still was sort of making it through the courts and finally ended about whether he was acting within his presidential capacity when he initially defamed her. By the way, that case still is moving forward. There's still another defamation case. So what is she like as a person? She is absolutely fabulous. She is, I think, and if you followed the testimony, I wasn't in the courtroom for this part, but the testimony of the psychiatrist who's talking about her personality and said she was like extra exuberant and whatever those words were, I'm like, that's E. Jean. I mean, she is, you just fall in love with her when you meet her. She's engaging, she's fun, can be kooky, she's creative. And I didn't even know when I met her about her incredible history in journalism. I didn't even read her. I wasn't an Elle magazine reader or advice column reader. Now I read her Substack, but I came to find out that she, worked, when I read her book, she worked on Saturday Night Live for a season and had an Emmy nominated sketch that came up during the trial. She also authored a biography of Hunter S. Thompson. She was considered like this female gonzo journalist type. And by the way, she's 9 years old. And it's my goal to wake up tomorrow looking as good as E. Jean Carroll did, on the stand.
Thank you for saying flipping.
Yay.
The jury...
right. No. I wasn't sure if I had to, but I remember we're live radio.
Yeah, we are live radio.
Yes. Woohoo, it's live.
Before you ask this, what can you explain briefly the difference between the two defamation cases? Because I'm not sure everybody understands.
I know I don't.
Okay. I'll talk about the one. Do you want to talk about the one that just happened first, or do you want to talk about the other one?
Yeah, let's talk about the one that just happened first, and we can talk about the one that's coming later.
Okay, so the case that just went to trial, where the 9-person jury unanimously found that Donald Trump had both sexually abused E. Jean Carroll in the late 90s in a dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman, and that he'd also defamed her in October of 2022. That's the case that she won and is going to get the $5 million in damages for. So when you heard me right, October of 2022. This case that she just won was filed in November of 2022. And you may say to yourself, how in the world could a complaint that was filed for sexual battery, including, allegations of rape and sexual abuse, how could a sexual assault and defamation case filed in federal court in October of 22 come to trial in May of 2023 and get to a verdict? Are you wondering that?
Yes, it seems pretty quick, right?
It's pretty quick because this case piggybacked on all of the discovery, right? The document sharing and the process associated with the first case that's going slower.
Got it. So all that was there, and this is sort of like a spin-off show.
Right. And so the first case, and what's important about this is that the reason why, even before Donald Trump defamed her in October of 2022 by saying she's not my type and she's making this whole story up, E. Jean was already planning to file the case in November, just a month later, because something special had happened. New York State had just enacted a law called the Adult Survivors Act. And this is a law that said the formerly existing statute of limitations on sexual assault of adults would be retroactively lifted for just 1 year. So there's a 1 year window that began in November of 2022 that goes to the November of 2023, where if you were in New York and you're a victim of sexual assault and you were an adult at the time, and at the time, if the law in place had the statute of limitations, there cannot be a criminal case, but you could now bring a civil case. So the minute that window opened, they filed. Well, they were planning to file that, and just before they got the papers ready, he again defamed E. Jean Caroll. And I say again because the first case was from when he was president. Okay, so that case has already gone through the courts. But the very first case that created all the document discovery and prepared the groundwork so they could actually win this one was the defamation case that E. Jean Caroll brought in November of 2022, right? That's 3 years earlier, against Donald Trump, based on him defaming her, saying she was a liar and a money grubber and all this stuff and not his type and not trustworthy. He said that in July or August of 2019. At the time, her book was about to be published. Her book, What Do We Need Men For? A Modest Proposal. Or What Are Men Good For? I keep forgetting. I have to tell you that Jonathan Swift reference, in the courtroom, I don't know if you followed any of it, but I was in the courtroom part of the time, and his lawyer, Joe Tacopina, did not get that it was satire. And the funniest flipping thing, I want to show you this. I know no one can see this because we're not actually.
Hold on, I'll hit record on our chat thing here so that where people can see it when you hold it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I am holding up an old. It's like a journal that I used to write daily in a journal before, you could just tweet out your thoughts to the world. And I had one of these blank journals, and I don't know if this is faux leather covered with this gilded spine for my thoughts. Anyway, I had one blank one. So April 25th, 2023, I sat in court for 3 days and have 100 odd pages, and you can see in script. Right
wow,
here.
yes. Very nice handwriting.
And so, I think I'll go back and look at that, I hope. And one of the funniest things in the trial was him, Joe Tacopina was trying to paint E. Jean before the jury on cross-examination as a man-hating person who would just invent stuff to ruin men. And so he said, in this book, you want to get rid of all the men? And she says, send them to Montana, in this deadpan. And you guys, I've got to go back and look at this, but it was just and then, she said for re-education. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, shuffle them off to Montana. And she said, for re-education. And then the judge at that point said, and then then E. Jean goes, it's satire. And he didn't get it. And then I was worried the jurors might not be familiar with satire, right?
Or a modest proposal.
Right.
We need readers in this country to continue.
The judge leaned over and kind of looked at the jury and said, the subtitle is A Modest Proposal. It's based on this satire. He said it was 700 years early. It's only 300. He had to correct the record later. But he did anyway. So but let's go back to the initial trial.
Hang on. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll go back to the initial trial. And maybe we'll have time to get to the whole new George Santos information that came out earlier today. We are speaking with Western New England University law professor and our expert on all things accusing Donald Trump, Jen Taub. We'll be back on the Fabulous 413.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We are here with law professor at Western New England University, unlike what's I've written here on my paper, Jen Taub, who is our expert legally on everything Trump. I feel like I've mixed those words up, but
I think you did
I'm getting the point across.
So let's go back to that first defamation case that you wanted to talk about.
Okay, so E. Jean was about to publish this book where she kind of goes on the road and tries to figure out what we need men for. That's what it's called. What do we need men for? And at the end of the day, she likes men and obviously doesn't want to send them all off to Montana for re-education. But it's an interesting book, and as part of it, she kind of when she was working on the book, it had come out. The whole Me Too movement had kind of come forward, and women were speaking out about sexual assault. And remember that it was the Harvey Weinstein moment. And that inspired her. She thought, I've always been this sort of cheerleader. Literally, she was a cheerleader in Indiana, and figuratively cheering people on and having kind of a public persona that was, exuberant and happy and let's take a step forward and yet, had this inner life that she didn't really share with people, and had realized that she probably should talk about some of her not so good experiences with men. And one of those very not so good experiences was with Donald Trump. And so part of this, before the book came out, I think it was New York Magazine published an excerpt, and in that excerpt it revealed that she had been, sexually assaulted by him. And he was furious, and he was president at the time, and he went out and spoke to the press when asked, and even when not asked, and said she was a nut job, that he'd never met her before, that she was not his type, meaning not, pretty enough to rape, as if rape is a crime of sex and not power, and such and such. And so that happened, and she brought and she lost her job at Elle Magazine. She brought that lawsuit. And what happened with that one, it got stalled because about a year later, Bill Barr, who was the attorney general, decided to remove the case to federal court and argue that he should step in and defend Donald Trump as an executive branch employee. And if he would be able to do that under the statute, the case would ultimately get dismissed if Donald Trump were acting within the scope of his employment when he defamed someone that he raped years earlier. That case went up and through the courts. The judges refused to decide whether he was acting in the scope. So now that will be up to a jury in the next defamation trial.
And there will be another defamation trial. What's the next, very briefly in the seconds we have left, what's the next legal hurdle that Trump will face, likely? Jen Taub from Western New England University.
Well, I do have a spreadsheet called Defendant Trump. And I think the next hurdle is likely to be an indictment in Fulton County, Georgia, unless Jack Smith can make recommendations to Merrick Garland and he doesn't sit on them forever and they get to it first.
And it seems like the Band-Aid has been ripped off when it comes to accusing and taking a former president to trial. So this is something that is very likely to happen. I'll also just add in the brief seconds that we have left that I want to audit your class next semester because you posted, with 13 criminal counts implicating numerous federal felonies, the Santos indictment will be a document to which we will return to throughout the fall term. We'll have to have you back on to talk about those 13 federal indictments as that. He pleaded not guilty just right before the show started. So more to come on that. Western New England University law professor Jen Taub, thank you so much for joining us here in the Fabulous 413.
Least surprising news ever.
Yes.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on the Fabulous 413, Afrobeat, rumba, merengue, Yoruba, Ethiopian groove.
Musical worlds collide at Colliderfest, and we'll talk with Colliderfest curator Ido Moore about this weekend's festival in Florence and about the new business model he's using to bring more music from around the world here to Western Mass.
It is so cool. And McGoverning with McGovern. If you have a question for the congressman, ask it, and maybe we'll ask him. Email us at thefab413@nepm.org or text us 1-800-639-9120.
Our director is Tony Double Shadow Dunn.
Our engineer is Betsy Neglect is Free Cortis.
Our technical team is Bart. A man should have some Ray-Bans Rankin. Kara, there's random food, people, Foster, and punk rock Dubé.
Musical thanks to Spouse, Happy Valley Guitar Orchestra, Very Delta, The Beatles, Dolly Parton, who is so mother, and the kids, and Homebody. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. We'll see you tomorrow in the Fabulous 413.